Could you imagine what it was like that day? I know they recreate it online. We see videos like that. We showed one, but just imagine the noise, the chaos a little bit, just the praising of God. It was spontaneous, people gathering together. So as we stated earlier, it's Palm Sunday. It's a day when we remember Jesus entering the city of Jerusalem for the Passover festival. This was soon after Jesus resurrected his friend Lazarus from the dead, and people were excited about his arrival. Let's read here from John chapter 12, verses 12 and 13. It says, "The next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, 'Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel.'" People were excited about what Jesus was going to do that week. But then, within days after that triumphal entry into the city, Jesus was arrested and abandoned, and eventually crucified. It says in Matthew chapter 26, verses 55 and 56, "In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, 'Am I leading a rebellion that you've come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled.' Then all the disciples deserted him and fled." Wow. What a shift. I know as a pastor, after the kids are up here and doing all this stuff and celebrating, and then you're saying, then they deserted him. The disciples, in fear and weakness, left. Even Peter denied even knowing Jesus 3 times. The disciples deserted him, and the crowds turned on him. Let's read about the crowds here in Luke chapter 23, starting in verse 20. It says, "Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they, referring to the crowd, kept shouting, 'Crucify him, crucify him.'" Wow, what a shift in the narrative, going from Hosanna, Hosanna to crucify, crucify him. What could have turned a crowd so much? Some people suggest that maybe they were bribed. I've heard others say that they believe that these were different crowds, one saying Hosanna and a different one saying crucify. But I believe these Palm Sunday scriptures reveal some clues to us as well. 3 things stand out to me in the scriptures that we read in John chapter 12. It says the crowd waved palm branches, and I think there's a clue in that. 2, they yelled Hosanna. And 3, the crowd referred to Jesus as the King of Israel. So, palm branches were quite common in Judea. Who remembers the first city that Joshua and the Israelites conquered when they crossed the Jordan? Jericho, right? Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. Jericho was known as the city of palms. That's its nickname, because of all the palms that were there. Palm branches in that time of history were symbols of victory. During the Feast of Tabernacles, a festival to remember how God victoriously delivered the people from Egypt, God instructed them to build temporary houses, shelters, and they were to be covered in palm branches. The Greeks gave palm branches to those who won games so they could wave them in victory. So in the Greek games, we get the Olympics, they would hand a victor palm branches. Today we have flags or banners they wave at events. When somebody was victorious, they'd hand them palm branches and they would wave them in celebration. The Romans had palm branches on their coins. Have you ever seen any ancient coins? They would have a palm branch on it. Usually had a face of Caesar on one side and palm branches on the other, or sometimes around Caesar they would have palm branches. The palm branches would be celebrating their king and their conquerors because they believed they were victorious. They were the conquerors. And so this was the culture of Jesus' time and the symbolism of these palm branches. So it seemed that as people heard that Jesus was coming to the city, they were believing that he was coming as their conquering king. Think about it. They called him the king of, remember? Israel. They were calling him king. The word Hosanna means save us. So they're saying, save us, blessed King of Israel. In their minds, they might have been thinking that Jesus was coming in to declare his throne and take over the city of Jerusalem. There's also another story that might have been within their minds, an image in their minds. The Seleucid Empire. Have any of you remember the Seleucid Empire? Between the Greek and Roman era, so between the two testaments, before Jesus comes into the picture here, the Seleucid Empire conquers Jerusalem. And they prohibited the Jews from doing any of their religious practices, and they desecrated the temple, used it for their own idol worship. There's a family called the Maccabees. Judas Maccabee, specific, the one person in the family, led a revolt against the Seleucid Empire that was controlling Jerusalem. And they won. The Maccabees and the people who joined them beat them, took over the city of Jerusalem, and regained the temple. Legend states that when the Jews rededicated the temple, that there was only enough oil you remember how they had the candelabra within the holy place of the temple? Only enough oil for one day. And they would have to go get a special kind of oil, but it would take a week or so to get it. But the legend says that they still filled it with the oil they had and lit the candle. And the story says that the candle burned. This is not in the scriptures, this is according to legend, that the oil burned for 8 days. The candle never went out for 8 days until more oil arrived. So the Jews began celebrating that day with an 8-day festival called Hanukkah. That's right, Hanukkah, or the Festival of Lights, because of the candle that burned. But what's interesting about that story is that it relates to Palm Sunday in that after they conquered the Seleucids, after the victory, Judas Maccabee rode into the city of Jerusalem to reclaim the temple and the city. And the people broke off these palm branches, still very much influenced by the Greeks who were just in power, broke them off and started waving palm branches to Judas Maccabee as he entered into the city to reclaim that city officially for God and not for the Seleucid Empire. So this was an image that many people knew. They didn't live in that time. This happened about 100 years before Jesus entered into the city. But the last time people gathered outside of the city gate and waved palm branches was for a conquering general coming into the city, and people waved, declaring victory over the Seleucids. Now here we are, and the Romans have took over. They're allowing the Jews to worship, but there are Roman guards, and the Jews have to pay taxes. And now this temple and Jerusalem are under the control of the Romans in Jesus' time. News spread about Jesus, how he performed miracles, he healed people, he cleansed people, he delivered people from demons, he multiplied the fish and the loaves, walked on water, and now raised somebody from the dead. Jesus, must be the Messiah. He must have come to deliver the city from the Romans, right? So they broke off palm branches, almost recreating the story of what happened when Judas Maccabee came in, saying, come on, he's our king of Israel, he's our conqueror. And that's why they shouted, Hosanna, because they were declaring Jesus as their king. Save us. Save us. We sing Hosanna, meaning we worship you, God. But literally, when we sing Hosanna, we're saying, God, help us, save us, deliver us. And so the people are saying, Jesus, we want you to deliver us. The Romans are here. Deliver us, save us. Jesus, you're our king. So how did the crowd turn that week? I think it began when people saw that Jesus didn't come into the city to overcome Rome. He didn't lead a revolt or start rallying troops. Instead, Jesus turned to the Jews and he began to reprimand them. The Jews, not the Romans. The Jews, he began to reprimand them for he's saying they desecrated the temple. What? It's the Romans. No, Jesus said the Jews were desecrating the temple. He was not acting like the king they were expecting. He turned over the money changers. Remember that? It made a whip and drove people onto the Gentile court because this was the place the Gentiles were supposed to be able to come and worship. What kind of king is that? What kind of king is that? That's not the king we want. That's not the kind of king we want. You know, this has been making me think, what kind of king do we expect Jesus to be? What image do we have in our minds of what Jesus is supposed to be? What do we expect from him? Sometimes we get ideas in our minds of what Jesus should do. We get ideas in our minds of how we expect Jesus to heal. And what if Jesus says, not now? What if we say, come on, Jesus, you got to heal this person? And Jesus said, not now. What? Thought you were my healer. Thought you were my deliverer. Sometimes we want Jesus to make our lives easier in this moment. And sometimes Jesus says, not now. You've got to go through this. What? It's not what I signed up for. With our little minds, we sometimes try to think of and try to understand how God thinks and understands and what he's going to do. We get our minds on certain thoughts about God, and could it be that we're ever wrong? Christians debate all kinds of things and say, I'm absolutely right. And sometimes the Jews thought the prophecies meant that Jesus would enter their city physically and conquer Jerusalem, defeat the Romans. That's how they interpreted the scripture. And guess what? They were wrong. They thought Jesus was going to establish a physical throne, sit on it, and drive out the Romans. They were wrong. It makes me think, we look very critically at hindsight at the Jews of that time. But there were religious leaders who studied the scripture. Jews, we talked about this in the past, since little ones, they studied scripture. They learned reading by reading scripture. They learned sentence structure through reading scripture. They understood the world through scripture. They memorized books of the Bible, not verses, not chapters, books. They would study the entire Torah and memorize it. And they got it wrong. So it's not about knowledge as much as it is being open with hearts to God, allowing him to be God and us to be his people. I'm often reminded of Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, where it says, God said, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts your thoughts." Do you get that image? He's saying, our minds, we might be able to comprehend stuff around here. And then he goes, okay, you see where your thoughts are down here? The heavens, come on, put a telescope in the sky and see how far you can see. And no, you still can't see heaven. And know that my thoughts and my ways are like that distance compared to ours. Comprehend that. We can't. Whew. As we gather on this Palm Sunday, I hope we celebrate Jesus. But we can't put Jesus in a box and say, okay, Jesus, we're going to celebrate you, but this is exactly how you have to moving forward. Jesus, we're going to celebrate you, but we're going to celebrate you with an expectation that you're going to do blank. We can't do that. We celebrate Jesus for who he is. He is the King of Kings. He's not the King of Israel. He is the King of Kings. Do you know when they crucified Jesus, they put a sign on the cross, King of the Jews, in mocking of him? He is the King of Kings, the Lord, our Lords, and all things are possible with him. And he will do things we never expect. That's the God we serve. He's going to do things we don't expect. We have to remember that our experience is limited by our experience. That our perspective is limited by the position in which we find ourselves. Our ability to imagine what is possible is limited by our weakness, the weakness of our own power to change the world around us. We're just limited. We know what we know. And I said it earlier this morning, we don't know what we don't know. Often we think that God can do anything, And sometimes I think when I've said that, I meant that he can accomplish anything I think he will, or what he should. And when God says he can do anything, he's saying, no, I can do anything, even if your mind hasn't conceived it yet. God healed people in the Bible and not others. Can you figure that out? God fed multitude with fish and bread, and other times he sent the crowds home. He blessed Job with wealth and children, and then he lost children and wealth. Why? God told Abram that he would give his descendants land. But first, Abram would need to walk and walk